everyone, my name is Adelanda and this is Solarpunking, where we discuss solarpunk ideology, things we can do in our communities to make them better, and ways to build the world that we want to live in. This is the climate change episode, part 1. Some of you are interested in solarpunk because you have formed a spiritual connection with nature. Either you grew up camping or fishing or hiking, or you've discovered that love recently and felt like you've truly begun living on Earth for the first time. Some of you are interested in solarpunk because you believe the science you've been shown about how damaging the Industrial Revolution was to the environment, and you care deeply about conservation, wildlife, and protecting the planet for all of those who inhabit it. Some of you might have just stumbled your way into this audience because my logo is cool. Thank you. I designed it myself and I hope you'll stick around. But me, I got into solarpunk because when I was a child, I used to have nightmares about the sun. Not just the sun, but like natural disasters. I never even experienced one, but I would have dreams about tornadoes destroying my neighborhood as I tried desperately to warn my family and friends, or drowning in rising floodwaters, or being swallowed alive by shifting plates that cause a massive rift in the ground. And then I would wake up and play with my cousins at my grandfather's house, catching lightning bugs and tasting honeysuckle. The climate is changing. We are currently in a climate crisis. I'm not saying that to cause panic or hopelessness. The purpose of this podcast is to give you hope, but to also reckon with our current situation and brainstorm ways to move forward. But that's the truth. Climate scientists the world over agree that we are nearing the point of climate disruption that will fundamentally change our global ecosystem. We are already seeing mass die-offs of insects, and I'm willing to bet that some of you have noticed. I remember when I drove across the country for the first time in 2016. I was on a road trip with my mom, and every time we stopped at a gas station, I had to clean my windshield because of all the bugs I'd encountered on the road. My last road trip in 2024? Let's just say my windshield didn't do nearly as much damage. But why should we care about bugs? I'd like to play this short clip for you from the Royal Entomological Society that explains why it's concerning that we're losing so many species of essential insects.
Insects are everywhere. They come in very different shapes, sizes, and colors, which allows them to live in almost every habitat. Insects have an important role in the food web. Without insects, our lives would be very different. They pollinate many of our fruits, flowers, and vegetables. They are food for amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. And they feed on lots of living and dead things themselves, using their different mouth parts and body shapes. Some insects are predators that hunt other animals. Others are herbivores that eat plants. And some live as parasites on or inside other animals. Others are scavengers and eat whatever they find in their environment. Lots of insects help to break down waste. Without them, dead animals, dead plants, and poo would start to build up and make a real mess. Most insects are not pests. Unfortunately, most people know more about the few insects that cause problems than the others that benefit the natural world. Insects help keep the balance of nature.
So if you have noticed, it's not just you. There are less fireflies and ladybugs than when you were a kid. This is the result of not only a changing climate, but habitat loss, disease, light pollution, and increased pesticide use. But today I want to talk about the largest driver of human-caused climate change: greenhouse gas emissions. What is the greenhouse effect? Well, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association's Global Monitoring Laboratory, which I'm surprised is still functional, minor gases which comprise only a small portion of the atmosphere that absorb infrared radiation contribute substantially to warming of the Earth's surface and atmosphere due to their abilities to contain the infrared radiation emitted by the Earth. Since these trace gases influence the Earth in a manner somewhat similar to a greenhouse, they are referred to as greenhouse gases, or GHGs. You're probably more familiar with the more abundant gases in our atmosphere, which are nitrogen at about 78% and oxygen at about 21%. But there's also argon, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and sulfur hexafluoride in trace amounts. These are the most influential greenhouse gases, and humans have a dominant role in their growing atmospheric concentrations. Their amounts are sufficient enough to absorb a major fraction of the infrared light in the atmosphere. Of the GHGs, CO2 is of the greatest concern because it contributes the most to the enhanced greenhouse effect in climate change. For this reason, scientists at NOAA and elsewhere have been studying this molecule carefully and attempting to quantify its abundance in the atmosphere and track how and why it changes. I'm going to play a quick clip about the carbon cycle, which is kind of hard to explain without a visual aid, so I found a source that can do it better than I can from PBS Nova. See why public services are so important? We are truly screwed if they are shuttered. I cannot imagine.
Have you heard of the greenhouse effect? CO2 is a greenhouse gas. Here's how it works. The sun sends a lot of energy towards the Earth. The Earth radiates energy back out into space, but some of that outgoing radiation gets trapped, warming our planet. One of the biggest factors in determining how much energy gets trapped is the concentration of greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide, in our atmosphere. The higher the levels of these energy-trapping molecules, the warmer our planet gets. Over the last 800,000 years, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere has cycled between 180 and 280 parts per million. But if we extend the CO2 graph forward to the present day, you'll see an extreme increase in the past couple hundred years. This is especially true over the last 60 years, since we've been able to directly measure the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere.
So not only is CO2 higher now than it has been during the last million years, the rate at which it's going up is also much faster than it has ever done in the past, about 100 times faster than it ever has during the last million years.
Today, CO2 levels are over 400 parts per million. The last time they were this high was about 3 million years ago, when there was little ice in the Arctic and the east coast of North America was underwater. Those changes can't happen overnight, but we're already starting to see things shift.
If you warm things up, it takes a while for the pollen to move northward to then grow plants. If you look at places in the tundra today, we're starting to see more shrubs. And as the shrubs grow, the trees start to migrate northward. And it might take another 1,000 years for the forest to come back around Lake Elgegikin.
The orbital cycles trigger the planet's warming and cooling over the past million years. CO2 amplifies that pattern, really helping to drive those glacial-interglacial cycles. Scientists are still trying to figure out how the orbital cycles and fluctuations in CO2 are related, but one thing is clear. The amount of CO2 in our atmosphere determines how much ice is on our poles.
What I like about that clip is the inspirational music at the end. I'm sorry. Let's get back on track. So, what are some Solarpunk solutions to the greenhouse effect? Well, an obvious answer would be cleaner technology. Solarpunk centers renewable energy sources like solar, wind, geothermal, and decentralized systems, which directly counteract the primary driver of the greenhouse effect, fossil fuel emissions. These come from coal, oil, and natural gas power plants, cars with internal combustion engines, and manufacturing industries like cement and steel. According to CU Boulder's Right Here, Right Now Global Climate Summit, the most promising solutions in the electrical sector are something we already have: renewable energy technologies, mainly wind and solar power. Switching to renewables would also create more jobs in the energy sector, and it would build resilience in communities hurt by climate change. Public transportation, like buses and trains, move people through cities more efficiently, reducing greenhouse gas emissions even when not at full capacity. Replacing the older buses with newer electric bus models might be a heavy lift, but would cut those emissions even more dramatically over time. But even with the current buses, compared with private car use, public transportation contributes only about half as much carbon to the atmosphere, and U.S. estimates show that it saves 37 million metric tons of carbon dioxide annually. Eliminating our dependence on fossil fuels would essentially phase out some of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. We won't need to mine for coal if we're not burning coal in power plants, or oil if we're shifting to a cleaner source of energy. The need for energy isn't going away, and our lives depend on it. So our next best move is to just find better sources of it. But also, degrowth. Degrowth challenges the capitalist obsession with infinite expansion, an obsession that relies on extractive industries and mass production, both major contributors to greenhouse gases. Here's the thing about degrowth. People tend to shun the idea of downsizing because they hear the word degrowth and they immediately think you can't have stuff. But that's not really what degrowth means. According to the Wikipedia page on degrowth, degrowth's main argument is that infinite expansion of the economy is fundamentally contradictory to the finiteness of material resources on Earth. It argues that economic growth measured by GDP should be abandoned as a policy objective. Policy should instead focus on economic and social metrics such as life expectancy, health, education, housing, and ecologically sustainable work as indicators of both ecosystems and human well-being. Degrowth theorists posit that this would increase human living standards and ecological preservation even as GDP growth slows. So what does that mean? It means that degrowth challenges infinite economic growth that only benefits the wealthy. Have you ever seen a grocery store throw out perfectly edible food that will inevitably spoil in a landfill, adding methane to the environment? Or a clothing manufacturer burn or trash last season's styles when they could be donated? Or a lot full of cars that will be crushed because they weren't purchased? This is all a result of excess production. Excess production adds to the greenhouse emissions because it takes energy to make that stuff. Then it goes to waste because no one uses it. Then it takes energy to destroy that stuff. And if it's not done ethically, which it usually isn't, it will add more pollution in the form of emissions to the environment. They're literally extracting and producing way more than we need, at least here in the US and likely in other Western countries. Degrowth focuses on producing what we need. Earth has finite resources, so an economy that grows endlessly by extracting, polluting, and consuming isn't sustainable. Degrowth promotes an economy that respects ecological boundaries, ensuring that future generations can have stuff too. Degrowth says we should measure progress with metrics like health, education, housing, and well-being, not just by how much money is changing hands. Degrowth supports abundance in the things that actually matter, not just owning more gadgets or shopping endlessly, which, would require a major cultural shift for those of us wasting away under capitalism. But it will be easier than you think to replace the high of consumerism with actual happiness when we finally feel as though our needs are being met and we can focus on living instead of surviving. Degrowth isn't about sacrifice at all, really. It's about prioritizing human and ecological health over profit. It forces us to ask ourselves, what's the point of all this stuff if people are sick, stressed, and the planet is collapsing? I couldn't explain the concept nearly as well as Professor Federico Savini of the University of Amsterdam, so I'll play a clip of him explaining degrowth here, but I highly recommend checking out the full 7-minute video, and I will link it in the notes.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Federico Savini. I am an Associate Professor in Environmental Planning at the University of Amsterdam. And today I'm going to answer the most asked questions about degrowth. What does degrowth mean? Degrowth means a planned downscaling of all economic activities that generate environmental impact and do not bring collective well-being. Starting from those activities that are less necessary for the well-being of people and the environment. Degrowth means a slowdown of the economy. However, degrowth means also an improvement of the conditions of living of everybody, starting from those groups of people that do not meet basic living standards today. So degrowth is also an improvement of living conditions for everybody. Degrowth, in fact, is often associated with a process of liberation from the obsession of economic productivity, and therefore the making of space for creativity, care, health, education, well-being.
So while reduce, reuse, and recycle is an excellent slogan, the reality of climate change requires so much more from us as a society, not just as individuals. I like to recycle when I live in a place that has the infrastructure to do so. I'm actively reducing my consumption of stuff and reusing what I have, and I think those are all great ways to practice living more sustainably. But the truth is, that's not enough. It was never enough, really. It was corporate PR created to shift the responsibility of environmentalism onto individuals instead of on our consumerist capitalist culture. The cultural shift is the heart of Solarpunk. Not only do we have to change policies, build clean tech, and cut emissions, we have to reimagine a culture that equates success with endless consumption and growth, or else we're just choosing the speed at which we want to sail into ecological collapse. We don't need more to be happier. We need deeper relationships, healthier ecosystems, and time to live fully. Solarpunk imagines a world in which the needs of the people, wildlife, and the ecosystem are the focus, and we can live peacefully and abundantly with shared, conserved resources. Thank you for listening to episode 7 of Solarpunking. You can catch new episodes every Sunday this summer, where I will talk about Solarpunk ideology, things we can do in our communities to make them better, and ways to build the world that we want to live in. If you've enjoyed listening in so far, consider sharing this podcast with your friends and family members who you think that would like to join the movement. Also, consider leaving me a comment to let me know what you liked or didn't like, or if you have mutual aid resources you want me to look into. Also, this week, we all found out that public media is being defunded by Congress, so consider donating to your local public media station. Go to protectmypublicmedia.org to find your local station and take action. Until next week, stay hydrated and motivated.